She didn't find messages from a mistress on his phone. She found a hotel reservation under a stranger's name and a receipt for a safe deposit box at a bank he'd never once mentioned in 11 years of marriage. Ekaterina Volkova, 36, head of sales at a real estate agency, had always considered herself someone who notices details. It was that variability that made her the company's top employee 3 years straight. But at home, right next to her own husband, she'd somehow managed to miss the obvious for nearly 6 months. Pavel, 39, worked as an insurance broker, a calm, steady profession, nothing that usually belongs in a thriller. He drove around a lot visiting clients, came home late, and blamed it on meetings and assessing damage after accidents. Ekaterina never double-checked his stories. Why would she? 11 years of marriage, 2 teenage kids, a house outside the city they'd been building together for the past 5 years. It all felt like a solid foundation, the kind you never question, until one day, you step on a crack. That crack appeared on a Thursday evening, when Pavel's phone, sitting on the kitchen counter, lit up with the notification. Your reservation at the Severny Hotel is confirmed. Check-in, today, 8 p.m. Guest, Kuznetsov AI. Not his name. Not their last name. Ekaterina froze, coffee cup in hand, staring at the screen. 5 seconds later, the notification disappeared on its own, as if it had never existed. She said nothing to her husband that night. Instead, she did what anyone who suspects something in 2026 does. She started digging. First, she pulled up the statements from their shared family card and was startled to find a separate one she'd never known about. A card from a bank they'd never used before, opened in Pavel's name 3 years earlier. The activity was sporadic, but the amounts were big. Transfers of 100,000 here, 300,000 there, sometimes as much as 500,000 rubles in a single transaction. The most common recipient was Kuznetsov AI, the same name from the hotel booking. Who was Kuznetsov? Pavel's lover hiding behind a male name for cover? A front for something darker? Ekaterina realized that with every new fact she gathered, the simple explanation, "My husband is cheating on me," was becoming less plausible, while something more complicated and more frightening became more real. She ran the name through her contact at the passport office, forcing herself to sound casual, like she was trying to track down an old classmate. Andrei Igorovich Kuznetsov, 41, turned out to be a former employee of the very same insurance company Pavel worked at, fired 4 years earlier after an internal investigation into fraud with auto insurance payouts. Fired, but apparently never convicted, the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. Her first theory fell apart. This wasn't a mistress, this was something tied to her husband's job, and it didn't go back 6 months, or a year. It went back at least 4. Ekaterina decided to follow Pavel personally, without involving anyone else for now. She figured the fewer people who knew about her suspicions, the safer everyone would be, including the kids. The following Thursday, when Pavel started getting ready for another client meeting, she left the children with her mother under the pretext of a late meeting at her own office, then followed his car in a taxi, keeping a safe distance, like in a cheap detective series she never thought she'd end up starring in. Pavel didn't check into the Severny Hotel, the one listed in the old notice. Instead, he drove to an abandoned industrial lot on the edge of town, a former truck depot that had been bought for demolition years ago, but never touched by the developers. There, by one of the half-ruined garages, a car was already waiting for him, a modest sedan with tinted windows. A woman got out, tall, dressed in dark clothes, her face hard to make out in the fading light. They talked for about 20 minutes, standing by their cars, never once hugging or kissing. This was definitely not a romantic date. It looked more like a business meeting, the kind both of them would rather forget. Ekaterina zoomed in with her phone and snapped a photo of the car's license plate, hands shaking, terrified that she herself might be spotted in the darkness of the taxi's back seat. The next day, she called her younger brother, Sergei, the one who worked as an investigator in the Economic Crimes Unit, and always proudly told stories at family dinners about fraud schemes he'd busted. The moment she said the words insurance fraud, Sergei stopped reacting like a brother and switched straight into professional mode. "Katya, do you have any idea what you could be getting into?" he asked, after she told him everything. The hotel notice, the strange map, Kuznetsov, and the meeting at the abandoned depot. Insurance payout schemes aren't just a bit of creative paperwork. This is structured, organized crime. We're talking sums with 6 zeros, and those people really don't like it when outsiders start asking questions, especially when that outsider is the wife of one of the people involved. He ran the license plate unofficially through his own channels, and the result left Ekaterina lying awake all night, staring at the ceiling next to her sleeping husband, afraid to make a single extra move that might wake him. The car was registered to a certain Victoria Grinko, age 33, who, according to the documents, worked as an independent auto expert, the kind of specialist who shows up at accident scenes and assesses the damage for insurance payouts. On paper, a completely legitimate profession. Off the record, as Sergei quickly found out, Grinko had been implicated in at least 3 cases of inflated damage assessments over the past 5 years, each time slipping out of trouble thanks to conveniently lost evidence. The picture was starting to come together, and it was worse than a simple affair. Pavel, it turned out, wasn't a victim and wasn't just some unlucky witness, he was a full participant in the scheme. As an insurance broker, he issued policies for clients who would then conveniently get into prearranged accidents. Grinko, as the expert, inflated the damage estimate several times over, and Kuznetsov, a former company employee who knew all the insurer's internal verification procedures, made sure the cases never drew the attention of the insurance company's security department. Judging by the transfers, the money was split 3 ways. The scheme had run flawlessly for 4 years, until last month. That was when, digging deeper, Sergei stumbled upon a case that turned everything upside down yet again. 3 weeks earlier, there had been an accident in the region with real, unimaginary victims, a passenger car colliding with a truck on the highway, where, according to the paperwork, the surname Grinko had coincidentally appeared again as the damage assessment expert. The driver of the car, a 45-year-old man, had died in the hospital 2 days after the crash without ever regaining consciousness. The forensic examination conducted by the investigation later determined that his vehicle's braking system had been tampered with in advance, not completely disabled, which would have raised immediate red flags, but weakened just enough to fail under a certain level of load, mimicking ordinary wear and tear and driver negligence from skipping routine maintenance. Here's the thing. As it turned out from his correspondence, the deceased man had reached out to the security department of Pavel's insurance company shortly before his death, intending to report a suspicious scheme of inflated payouts that he'd accidentally become a witness to while getting a policy for his own small auto repair shop. He wasn't part of the scheme, he was a potential whistleblower. Ekaterina sat across from her brother in his car, parked near a supermarket where they'd supposedly run into each other while grocery shopping, and felt the ground literally give way beneath her feet. She asked the one question she was most terrified in the world to hear the answer to. Do you think Pasha knew that this man was going to be killed? Sergei was silent for a long time before answering, weighing whether to tell his sister the whole truth at this stage, while the investigation wasn't even officially open yet. I think, he said finally, that one of the 3 decided that the silence of a whistleblower was worth more than his life. And I think your husband either knew about it in advance or found out after the fact and chose not to report anything to the police. Neither of those options, Katya, makes him innocent. That same night, Ekaterina, unable to bear the tension any longer, confronted Pavel in the kitchen while the kids were already asleep, blunt, no beating around the bush, slapping printed bank transfers and a photo of Grinko's car down on the table. She expected denial. She expected some excuse about a coincidental match of names. She expected anything except what actually happened. Pavel broke down and cried, really cried, heavily, the way a grown man cries when he's carried something inside him for too long that's been crushing him from within. He told her part of the truth, exactly the part he himself believed to be the least monstrous version of events. He had indeed been involved in the inflated payout scheme for the past 4 years, started small, with a single suspicious accident he'd been persuaded to process as is for a generous payoff at a time when the family desperately needed money for Ekaterina's mother's treatment. One accident snowballed into a system that, as he saw it, offered no way back. Kuznetsov had made it abundantly clear that silent participants in such schemes didn't get to walk away on their own terms. As for the man who died on the highway, Pavel swore he only found out afterward from the news, and that he'd stayed silent for 3 weeks not because he condoned the murder, but because he was paralyzed with fear. Going to the police meant not just destroying his own life and ending up in prison. It meant, in his mind, putting Ekaterina and the kids directly in harm's way. Kuznetsov had once, almost casually, mentioned the address of their countryside house in conversation, even though Pavel had never told him. That was exactly why, in recent weeks, he'd started carrying on his own extremely cautious correspondence with an independent journalist who specialized in investigating insurance fraud, under a pseudonym, through an anonymous email account, trying to pass along evidence in a way that made it impossible to trace him as the source before the time was right. The Severny Hotel that Thursday wasn't a date and wasn't a meeting with accomplices. Pavel was supposed to meet the journalist in person for the first time. But the meeting fell apart. The person who'd presented himself as the journalist never showed up, and instead, a number Pavel didn't recognize called him. A voice on the other end said, briefly, "Don't ever do that again." Then the line went dead. This changed everything. Pavel wasn't protecting criminals. It seemed he was trying, too late and too timidly, to find a way out of the scheme he'd been dragged into years ago, but not decisively enough to justify 3 weeks of silence about a man's death. Ekaterina didn't know whether to forgive her husband for his cowardice or hate him for his complicity. She handed over everything she had, including Pavel's confession, recorded on her phone's voice recorder without his knowledge while he was talking, to Sergei. He, in turn, escalated the case to a level where it could no longer be handled by a single investigator, but required an entire task force, because the scale of the financial flows suggested someone far more influential behind the scheme than a modest former employee like Kuznetsov. The searches were carried out simultaneously in 3 places: at Kuznetsov's, at Grinko's, and at the insurance company's office where Pavel worked. During the search of Grinko's home, investigators found drafts of fake expert evaluations for upcoming accidents, proof that the scheme hadn't stopped even after a man's death and was planning to keep running. At Kuznetsov's, they found correspondence in which he coordinated with an as-yet unidentified person going by the initials VS on matters of waste disposal, a phrase that made the investigators' blood run cold, because it described what had happened to the man on the highway all too precisely. They couldn't identify VS right away. Pavel insisted he didn't know who it was. Grinko refused to say anything at all during interrogations, invoking her lawyer. Kuznetsov tried to pin everything on the head of the insurance company's security department, a man who was already dead by that point, having suffered a sudden heart attack literally 2 days before the searches began. A death that, in light of everything that had happened, no one was willing to write off as a coincidence anymore. But there was no one left to prove otherwise. The case is still open. Unlike Grinko and Kuznetsov, Pavel got some leniency from the investigators as someone who voluntarily turned over key evidence and helped expose the scheme. He's facing a suspended sentence instead of real jail time, on the condition of full cooperation with the investigation and payment of compensation to the victims' families. Ekaterina isn't sure she's fully forgiven him, but what she does know for certain is this. For 11 years, she was married to a man she apparently never truly knew at all, and that discovery turned out to be more terrifying than the most elaborate betrayal she could have ever conjured up in her darkest fantasies. A month into the investigation, the identity of the mysterious VS finally surfaced in the case files. The initials didn't belong to some outsider. They were Victoria Sergeyevna Grinko's, the very same woman expert. VS wasn't Kuznetsov's accomplice at all. She was his direct superior in the scheme from day one, the person who'd originally conceived and built the entire system, not the low-level player she'd tried to make herself look like during interrogations. And on that very same day, the information hit the case file. Victoria Grinko, who was under a travel ban at the time, vanished without a trace from her apartment. No sign, no explanation, not a single clue as to where she might have gone. Almost as if she'd known all along that the truth would eventually come out, and had a plan in place for exactly that day.